This morning's reading is in two parts. The first part is taken from Job and may be found on page 538 in the Pew Bibles, and then the second part is from Psalm 41, page 567. So, Job chapter 37, verses 14 to 24. Listen to this, Job. Stop and consider God's wonders. Do you know how God controls the clouds and makes the lightning flash? Do you know how the clouds hang poised, those wonders of him who is perfect in knowledge? You who swelter in your clothes when the land lies hushed under the south wind, can you join him in spreading out the skies, hard as a mirror of cast bronze? Tell us what we should say to him. We cannot draw up our case because of our darkness. Should he be told that I want to speak? Would any man ask to be swallowed up? Now, no one can look at the sun, bright as it is in the skies, after the wind has swept them clean. Out of the north he comes in golden splendor. God comes in awesome majesty. The Almighty is beyond our reach and exalted in power, in justice and great righteousness. He does not oppress. Therefore, men revere him, for he does not have regard for all the wise in heart. Now we'll turn to Psalm 41 on page 567. And I'm going to read the first 3 verses and the last. Blessed is he who has regard for the weak. The Lord delivers him in time of trouble. The Lord will protect him and preserve his life. He will bless him in the land and not surrender him to the desire of his foes. The Lord will sustain him on his sick bed and restore him from his bed of illness. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Amen and amen. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today, but somehow I managed to pick up COVID whilst away in Berlin. But fortunately, with the help of Phil Vale and the technology team, we've been able to pre-record my sermon so that it can go out today. For those that don't know me, my name is Richard Warren. I'm the church treasurer and also an occasional preacher. We're starting today a mini-series on creation, running up to Harvest Sunday in 2 weeks' time. We'll look at the theme in the Old Testament, and next week we'll be looking at the New Testament. So let's turn to today's passages that we've just had read to us. The first one is from the book of Job. This is a book that deals with the story of poor old Job, who loses all his wealth as well as his social standing, and how he deals with this adversity. As he wrestles with his response to what feels like an unjustifiable fall from grace, the story deals with the difficult topic of why bad things might happen to good people. This is a question that, from my own personal experience, non-Christians will ask of their Christian friends. And here we have been reading the words of Elihu. He's an onlooker, listening to the discussion between Job and his 3 so-called friends. And these friends are maintaining that the reason Job has lost all his wealth must be to do with something that he has done wrong. The story later confirms that this is not the case. And in this passage, Elihu describes the majesty and the power of God as seen in the weather, from the lightning flash in verse 15 to the bright sun after the winds have been blown away in verse 21. Too bright for anyone to look at. God, who comes in awesome majesty, is also the God in verse 23, who brings justice and righteousness and who does not oppress. Job's prosperity is restored in the end, after he acknowledges God's power. But that's the topic of another sermon. And in our second passage, it is from the book of Psalms. This is the book of poetry, prayers, and songs. And Psalm 47 is thought to have been written by David when he was sick and in exile, being hunted by his very own son, Absalom. He must have been at a very low point when he wrote these words. And yet, he can still see God's power and majesty and sings his praises in verse 13. But whilst these passages were written from different perspectives, they both acknowledge that God has a direct influence over everything. For David, it was God's power of protection from his enemies and from sickness. And for Elihu, it was the very power of the storms and the heat of the sun, things beyond his own comprehension. And it is indeed a wonder to see the power of the weather, be it thunderstorms or bright sunny skies. One of my passions, as some of you may know, is rowing. And my non-rowing friends often ask me, why do rowers get up so early in the morning, often in the dark and cold? And I will confess there are on occasions when I crawl out of bed on a dark, cold morning that I ask that same question. But there can be no greater pleasure than to see the sun rise over a still river and listen to the early dawn chorus. Little wonder that Elihu looks on in awe at the power of the sun and the brightness of the sun after the clouds have been dispersed by the wind in verse 21. My other sporting passion is cycling, and I had the misfortune a couple of years ago to fall off my bike and break my collarbone. It was a painful experience. But what amazed me was that my broken collarbone could mend itself in a matter of few weeks, even without the intervention of a doctor. It feels like a miracle. But surely science can explain all this. Doctors understand the mechanism by which bones heal. We know why the clouds form, what the sun is, and why the wind blows. But can we change the weather at will? Can we reverse climate change? I sincerely hope that we can find the answers to these questions in time. On my recent cycling holiday to France, one of my fellow cyclists questioned whether Christians could really believe in this day and age that God made the world. Surely, he said, people couldn't literally believe in the creation story that God made the world in 6 days as set out in Genesis. Are people really that naive? The famous scientist Albert Einstein, who postulates the theory of general relativity that sits at the heart of most of today's science, once said, "Two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity." And I'm not sure about the universe. But he also said, God reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists. Indeed, although Einstein was not a Christian, he saw religion and science as not in opposition to each other. His scientific theory made him believe that the world could not have been formed by a set of random events. Indeed, modern science does not have all the answers. Let's just take the Big Bang theory. That just remains a theory. No one knows what was before the singularity, where all time, mass, and energy coexisted in one single point, immediately before the Big Bang, which exploded in a flash of light, forming the universe. Sure, this sounds just as incredible as the story in Genesis, where we read, "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light." It's difficult not to see some similarities between the verses in Genesis 1 and our scientific theories, even if the timescales are different. Indeed, it may surprise some people that the astrophysicist and mathematician who first postulated the Big Bang theory, Georges Lemaitre, was a Belgian Roman Catholic priest. He was another man of science who saw that the theories were not in contradiction to his faith. Indeed, those who attend Alpha courses are often told that science may explain the how, but it's faith that tries to answer the questions why. I will confess that I find it extraordinary that science comes up with theories such as dark energy and dark matter. These are substances that cannot be measured or cannot be seen, and yet, to make the scientific theories add up, must make up 95% of the universe, with just 5% of the universe being what we see and touch. Well, to my mind, perhaps Elihu, Job, and David weren't quite as naive after all. So if science doesn't have the complete answer, how do we respond? Do we respond like David and Elihu? Their faith made them able to make sense of a complex and sometimes difficult world. They lived their lives recognizing the supremacy of God in lives and the world around them. And for us, thousands of years later, I'd like to suggest that we can make sense of a complex world too, by putting our faith in the gospel message. And if indeed God is the driving force of all that we can see and all that is unseen, what is our response to all this? I'd like to suggest, like Elihu and David, we may need to accept that for reasons we don't fully understand, everything may not go the way we would wish. We need to take the courage from the examples of Job and David that adversity can be overcome if we keep our faith in God's ultimate power. I also believe each of us can play a role in looking after what God has made. For example, as a church, we took the initiative to become accredited as a silver eco-church. Do look at the plaque as you leave, just as a number of other churches in the diocese. We have plans to go further and are exploring the possibility of having solar panels fitted to the church hall roof and improving our insulation. Not only will this make financial sense, which you will appreciate is close to my heart, but it also helps preserve the beauty and wonder of all that we see. And that will allow our children and their children to wonder at the beauty of the sunrise. If you want to get involved, do please speak to anyone on the PCC. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. In addition, I'm sure that each one of us takes our own steps and decisions to leave a lighter footprint on the beauty of this world. So today, again, we have seen how these old Bible study stories can be relevant to today as much as they were when they were written thousands of years ago. And they live as an example for us to positively live, putting our faith in the good news of the Gospels, and how that can influence how we look at our personal circumstances and the world around us. Next week, as I mentioned earlier, we'll look at the New Testament view of creation and Jesus' views of the beauty and simplicity of creation. But until then, it is my prayer that we can find the strength to put our faith and trust in God. Amen.